He thought it was just another routine check until the screen paused on a detail no one else would have noticed. Maya Johnson's hand moved too quickly as she adjusted her sleeve beneath the soft amber lights of the restaurant, and for a fraction of a second something darker than shadow marked her skin. Ethan Caldwell leaned back in his chair inside the quiet security room high above the dining floor, the city stretching beyond the glass and miles of silent power below him. The footage looped again. Her motion precise, almost practiced, like someone who had learned to disappear in plain sight. Rewind, he said quietly, though no one else was in the room. The system obeyed the image, flickering back her arm, rising the fabric, slipping the mark, appearing, then gone again. He didn't blink. The room around him was filled with polished steel and dark wood, a place where decisions were made without noise, without witnesses, and yet this small detail, this almost invisible moment, held his attention in a way $1 million deals never did. Maya moved through the restaurant floor below, carrying trays, balancing glasses, offering polite smiles that never quite reached her eyes. She was efficient, invisible, exactly how someone survived in a place like that, exactly how someone stayed unnoticed. Ethan had built an empire on noticing things others ignored, patterns and silence, truth behind behavior, and what he saw now was not clumsiness, not coincidence. It was something controlled, something hidden. He stood slowly, the chair behind him barely making a sound. His reflection caught briefly in the glass, tall, composed, unreadable, the kind of man people lowered their voices around without knowing why. He adjusted his cufflinks once, then turned toward the door below. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversations, the clink of silverware, the low rhythm of a night that promised nothing unusual. Maya approached table 12. Her steps measured, her voice steady as she set down a glass of water, but her sleeve slipped again, just slightly, and this time he saw it without a screen between them, a faint discoloration along her wrist, partially concealed by fabric and timing too precise to be accidental. She corrected it instantly. Eyes lowered, breath even as if nothing had happened, but Ethan had already seen enough. He didn't call anyone, he didn't interrupt, he simply watched, because sometimes the truth revealed itself not in what was shown, but in what was carefully hidden. And as he stood there in the soft glow of chandelier light, surrounded by wealth and quiet privilege, he understood something was wrong, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that settled into the air, like a weight no one else seemed to feel. And for the first time that night, Ethan Caldwell wasn't thinking about business or power or control. He was thinking about a waitress who had learned how to hide pain so well that the world had stopped looking, and he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he was about to look closer. The dinner rush moved forward like nothing had changed, but Ethan Caldwell no longer saw the room the way everyone else did. He noticed the pauses, the subtle hesitations, the way Maya Johnson shifted her weight when she thought no one was watching. She stayed near the edges of every table, never too close, never too far. Her voice soft, controlled, each word measured like it had been rehearsed, not for service, but for safety. A manager passed by her once, whispering something under his breath about moving faster, and she nodded immediately, apologizing even though she had done nothing wrong, the kind of apology that came from habit, not mistake. Ethan remained where he was standing, just beyond the center of the room, his presence unnoticed by most, but not by the staff. They felt it without understanding it, the quiet gravity that followed him like a shadow. Maya approached another table, carrying a tray of drinks, her hands steady, but her fingers slightly tense, as if holding more than just glass and liquid. One of the guests laughed loudly, brushing past her arm as he stood, and for a second her expression changed, not fear, not anger, something deeper, something practiced. She stepped back instantly, lowering her gaze, adjusting her sleeve again, too quickly, too carefully. Ethan watched the pattern repeat, and patterns did not lie. He moved toward the bar slowly, not drawing attention. The bartender straightened, immediately recognizing him. Without needing introduction, Ethan did not look at him. Instead, his eyes remained on the reflection in the mirror behind the bottles. Maya, moving between tables like a ghost in her own life. How long has she worked here? He asked quietly. The bartender hesitated just a moment before answering. About 6 months, sir. Never late, never complains, keeps to herself. Ethan nodded once. 6 months was long enough for something to become routine, long enough for silence to settle into place like it belonged. The door at the front of the restaurant opened again, and a shift in the air followed, not loud, not obvious, but noticeable to someone who understood presence. A man stepped inside, not remarkable at first glance, average height, neutral expression, the kind of person people forgot the moment they looked away, but Maya did not forget her body reacted before her mind could hide at her shoulders, stiffen her breath caught. Just slightly her hand tightened around the tray before she forced it to relax. Ethan saw all of it reflected in the glass. The man did not head to a table immediately. He scanned the room like he was searching for something or someone, and when his eyes found Maya, he gave a small nod, not friendly, not warm, just certain. Maya turned away, quickly focusing on her work, but her movements were no longer fluid. There was a tension, now a quiet urgency. Ethan set his glass down. Without taking a sip, something unseen had entered the room, and while no one else noticed, he understood the night had just changed. The man did not rush, and that was what made him noticeable to Ethan Caldwell. Because urgency could be explained, but calm intention always carried purpose. He walked toward the bar first, as if he belonged there, as if he had done this many times before, and Maya Johnson noticed every step. Without turning her head, her movements became sharper, now more controlled, the way someone adjusts when they know they are being watched, not by a room, but by one specific person. Ethan shifted slightly, giving himself a clearer angle, not stepping in, not yet, because timing mattered more than action in moments like this. The man ordered a drink, his voice low, steady. The bartender responded with polite efficiency. But there was a flicker of recognition, not familiarity, but discomfort, the kind that passes quickly when people choose not to ask questions. Maya approached the bar to pick up an order, and for a fraction of a second, she froze, not completely, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for Ethan to understand something deeper was unfolding. She reached for the tray, her hand brushing close to the man's, but not touching. He leaned slightly toward her, just enough to close the distance without making a scene. His words were too quiet for anyone else to hear, but her reaction spoke louder than sound. Her shoulders tightened, her breath shortened, her eyes dropped instantly, not in submission, but in calculation. She nodded once, a small motion barely visible, then turned away, carrying the tray as if nothing had happened. But her steps betrayed her. She moved faster now, not running, but leaving distance between them. Ethan felt the shift settle across the room like a subtle drop in temperature, nothing loud, nothing obvious, yet everything had changed. The man watched her go, not with anger, not with impatience, but with certainty, as if her reaction confirmed something he already knew. Ethan stepped forward now, not directly toward them, but closer into the rhythm of the room, blending into movement instead of interrupting it. Because power did not always arrive loudly, sometimes it arrived by simply being present. Maya reached table 16, placing down plates with careful precision, her voice steady again, but her eyes never fully lifted. She was listening to something behind her, measuring distance. Without looking, Ethan followed her line. Without turning his head, the man had moved again, not toward a table, not toward the exit, but toward her path, intersecting naturally, as if by coincidence. But Ethan knew better. Coincidence did not repeat itself this cleanly. Maya stepped back from the table and nearly collided with him, her tray tilted slightly, the glasses clinking softly, but not falling. She caught them in time, her control returning instantly, but not before her sleeve slipped again, revealing the same faint mark beneath the light. The man's gaze dropped to it for a moment, then lifted back to her face, and this time his expression shifted, not visibly, not enough for others to read. But Ethan saw it, recognition, not surprise, as if that mark was not new to him. Maya pulled her sleeve down again, her fingers steady now, but her breathing was not. She excused herself, quietly moving past him, and for the first time, she did not look invisible. She looked like someone trying to disappear, and failing. Ethan stopped walking, his eyes fixed on the space between them. The man did not follow immediately. He simply stood there watching her leave, and in that stillness Ethan understood something without needing words. This was not chance, this was not misunderstanding, this was a pattern that had followed her into this room, and for the first time that night Ethan Caldwell began to move, not as an observer, but as someone who had already decided that silence was no longer an option. The space between them narrowed, not by distance, but by intention, and Ethan Caldwell stepped into it without raising his voice, without calling attention, because real control did not need an audience. Maya Johnson had already reached the service station, her hands moving through familiar motions, stacking plates, adjusting silverware, pretending the rhythm of work could protect her. But her eyes betrayed her. They flicked once toward the mirror behind the bar, checking where the man stood, measuring how close he had come. Ethan saw it all in the reflection. Before he saw it directly, the man had shifted again, now only a few feet away, not touching, not speaking, just close enough to exist inside her awareness like a shadow that would not leave. Ethan stopped beside the bar, his presence subtle but immediate. The bartender straightened again, sensing the shift in the air. Without understanding it, Ethan rested his hand lightly on the polished surface, his gaze steady, not on Maya, not on the man, but on the space where their paths would cross again, because they always did. Patterns repeated, and this one was tightening. The man took another step forward, his posture relaxed, his expression neutral, but his eyes fixed on Maya with quiet certainty, as if he expected her to respond without being asked. Maya felt it before she saw it. Her shoulders stiffened. Again, the smallest movement, but enough. She turned slowly, facing him this time. There was no tray between them, no table, no distance, just a few feet of open floor filled with everything unsaid. The man spoke softly, his words low, controlled, impossible to hear from more than a step away. But Maya reacted immediately. Her chin lowered, her fingers tightened at her sides. She shook her head, once not dramatically, not defiantly, just enough to say no. Without drawing attention, the man did not raise his voice. He did not step closer, he simply waited as if patience would do the work for him. And for a moment the room continued around them. Glasses clinked, conversations flowed, a laugh broke from a nearby table. But inside that small space, everything had gone still. Ethan moved, then not quickly, not aggressively, just one step forward, placing himself within reach of both of them, his presence cutting through the moment like a quiet line that could not be ignored. The man noticed first, his eyes shifting toward Ethan, measuring, assessing, trying to understand who had entered the space. Maya noticed second, her breath catching, just slightly, not from fear this time, but from something else, something uncertain. Ethan did not look at her, not yet. His gaze remained on the man, calm, steady, unreadable, and when he spoke his voice carried just enough to settle the air, without disturbing it. She is working, he said, nothing more, no accusation, no threat, just a statement. Simple and precise. The man held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a faint smile, not warm, not friendly, just controlled acknowledgement, as if recognizing something he had not expected. He stepped back half a step, creating distance, but not leaving the room. Maya did not move. She remained exactly where she was, her hands still, her breathing uneven. The silence stretched for a second too long before the noise of the restaurant returned, filling the gap as if nothing had happened. Ethan turned, then finally, looking at her, not at her face, but at her wrist, where the sleeve still sat just slightly out of place. And in that brief glance he saw it again, the mark, the pattern, the truth she had tried to hide. And he understood now, this was not a single moment. This was something that followed her, something that had found her here. And for the first time, Maya Johnson was not invisible anymore, and neither was what she had been trying to keep unseen. The moment did not explode, it settled. And that was what made it dangerous, because nothing in the room had visibly changed, and yet everything had shifted. Maya Johnson lowered her gaze again, her hands returning to motion as if the interruption had never happened. But her rhythm was different now, not broken, just altered, like someone adjusting to a new reality. She moved toward the kitchen doors, carrying an empty tray, her steps measured but quicker than before, not running, not escaping, just creating distance. Ethan Caldwell did not follow immediately. He remained where he stood, watching the man instead, because the truth of a situation was rarely in the reaction of the one affected, but always in the behavior of the one causing it. The man did not leave. He did not return to the bar. He simply stood there for a second longer, his expression calm, his posture unchanged, as if nothing had been challenged. Then he turned slightly, scanning the room again, not searching now, but confirming something, and Ethan understood this was not over. This was a pause. Maya disappeared behind the kitchen doors, the soft swing of them closing marking the first real separation between her and the space outside. Inside the kitchen, the noise was louder, sharper, plates moving, voices calling orders, the organized chaos of a place that never stopped. But even there she did not blend in completely. One of the other staff members spoke to her quickly, asking about an order, and she responded with a nod, her voice steady, but her hands paused for just a fraction too long before continuing, as if she needed that moment to reset, to become invisible again. Ethan moved, then not toward the man, but toward the manager, who had been watching from a distance, uncertain of what he had just witnessed, uncertain of what he should do. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. She needs a break, he said simply. The manager hesitated only for a second before nodding, immediately understanding that this was not a suggestion. Ethan turned away before any question could be asked, his attention already shifting back toward the kitchen doors, because the situation had moved there now, and where it moved he followed without urgency, Without hesitation, the doors opened again, and Maya stepped out, her expression composed, her posture controlled, but there was something different in her eyes now, not fear, not exactly, something closer to awareness. She saw him this time, not as a customer, not as a presence, but as someone who had stepped into a moment no one else had acknowledged, and for a second she did not look away. Ethan met her gaze briefly, then shifted it to her wrist, not long enough to embarrass, not long enough to expose, just enough to let her know that he had seen what she thought no one noticed. She adjusted her sleeve again, slower this time, not hiding, not denying, just aware. And in that small motion something unspoken passed between them, not trust, not yet, but recognition. The man was still in the room, still moving through it, as if nothing had happened, but Ethan no longer needed to watch him constantly because he had already seen enough. The pattern was clear, the presence was real, and the silence that had protected it until now had been broken, not loudly, not publicly, but in a way that could not be undone. And as Maya turned back toward her next table, carrying herself with the same quiet strength she had always shown, there was something different beneath it now, something that had shifted the balance ever so slightly, because for the first time since she had learned how to disappear, someone had chosen to see her and not look away. The balance in the room had shifted, but it had not settled, and Ethan Caldwell understood that moments like this did not resolve themselves, they revealed what came next. Maya Johnson continued working her path, now slightly altered, not avoiding him, but not approaching either, her movements precise, her voice steady, as she greeted a new table as if nothing had changed, but the difference was there in the details, the way she paused before stepping into open space, the way her eyes scanned reflections instead of faces. She was no longer just moving through the room, she was navigating it. Ethan did not interrupt her rhythm. He stepped back toward the edge of the floor, positioning himself where he could see both the entrance and the bar without turning his head, because awareness was not about motion, it was about presence. The man had taken a seat now at a table near the back, not hidden, but not central either, a place where he could observe without being observed easily. He had ordered something simple, a drink, untouched in front of him, his attention not on the menu, not on the room, but on Maya as she moved between tables, never staring directly, always watching, through timing, through angles, through patience. Ethan recognized that kind of focus. It was not casual, it was not temporary, it was something practiced. Maya approached a nearby table, her posture composed, her tone calm, as she spoke to a couple seated beneath the soft glow of a hanging light. She wrote down their order, her pen steady, but her fingers pressed slightly harder than necessary, the small tension revealing itself only in the way the paper bent beneath the pressure. She finished quickly, offering a polite smile before stepping away, and as she turned, her path once again aligned with the space near the back, where the man waited, she slowed just slightly, not enough to draw attention, but enough to prepare herself. Ethan moved at the same time, not toward her, not toward the man, but into the line between them, positioning himself as if he had always intended to stand there, his presence quiet but deliberate. Maya passed by first, her shoulder almost brushing his, but not quite, her breath steady now, her steps controlled. She did not look at him this time, but she did not look away either, she simply continued forward, and that was enough. The man noticed next, his gaze shifting as Ethan entered his line of sight, the faintest pause in his movement, the smallest recalculation of distance and expectation. Ethan did not speak, he did not need to, his presence answered a question that had not been asked yet. The man leaned back slightly, his expression unchanged, but his attention divided, now no longer fixed on Maya alone. The room continued around them, unchanged on the surface, but beneath it something had been interrupted, not ended, not resolved, but altered in a way that could not be ignored. Maya reached the service station again, setting down her tray, her hand still for a brief second longer than necessary, before continuing, as if she needed to remind herself of the routine, of the ordinary, of the safe. Ethan remained where he was, not watching her directly, not confronting the man, but holding the space between them steady, and in that quiet control something new began to form, not fear, not tension, something closer to protection, the kind that did not announce itself, the kind that did not demand attention, but once present changed everything. And for the first time that night, the pattern that had followed Maya into this room no longer moved freely. It had encountered something it could not easily pass through, and the room, though still filled with light and conversation, held a new kind of silence, one that watched and waited for what would happen next. The room had not returned to normal, it had simply adjusted to a new presence, and Ethan Caldwell held that presence without effort, without movement, as if he had always been part of the structure itself. Maya Johnson continued her work, but something inside her had shifted from reaction to awareness. She no longer moved only to avoid, she moved with intention, her path chosen, not just for efficiency, but for distance, for control, for space. She approached another table, near the center, her voice steady. As she spoke, her tone professional, but her mind clearly tracking more than orders, more than requests. She was measuring the room in a way she had not before. Ethan saw it in the timing of her steps, the way she paused near reflective surfaces, the way she placed objects between herself and open space without drawing attention to it. The man at the back table remained seated, his drink untouched, his posture relaxed, but no longer fully at ease, his attention divided between Maya and the man who had quietly inserted himself into the pattern. Ethan Caldwell. He shifted slightly in his chair, adjusting his angle not toward Maya, but toward Ethan, as if trying to understand the change and balance the interruption in something that had previously moved without resistance. Ethan did not look at him directly. He did not need to. The awareness was mutual, already established. Without words, Maya returned to the service station again, setting down her tray, her hands slowing, just for a moment longer this time, as if she was gathering something, not courage, not exactly something steadier, something that had been absent before. And then she did something small, but different. She did not immediately reach for another task. She stood still for a second longer than routine allowed, and in that second she looked across the room, not searching, not scanning, but seeing. Her eyes passed over the tables, the bar, the entrance, and finally settled for the briefest moment on Ethan, not in fear, not in confusion, but in recognition. He had not left, he had not ignored what he saw, and that alone changed something inside her. Ethan held her gaze only long enough to acknowledge it, then shifted his attention back to the room, because protection did not require focus, it required presence. Maya moved again, but this time her steps carried less urgency, less quiet retreat. She approached a table closer to the back than she had before, placing herself within the same space the man occupied, but not within his reach, not directly. Her voice remained calm as she spoke to the guests, her posture composed, but the difference was subtle and real. She was no longer shrinking from the space, she was moving through it. The man noticed immediately, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in recalculation. He leaned forward just enough to test the distance again, to see if the pattern would return to what it had been before, but it did not. Maya finished at the table and turned away, her path crossing near him once more. But this time her movement did not falter, she did not rush, she did not retreat, she simply passed by. And in that moment something unspoken broke, not loudly, not visibly, but enough for Ethan to feel it. The pattern had changed, not ended, not resolved, but altered in a way that could not be undone, and the man knew it too, because for the first time since he had entered the room, he did not move immediately. He remained seated, watching, as if deciding what came next. And Ethan Caldwell remained exactly where he was, holding the space steady, knowing that whatever happened next would no longer follow the same path it had before. The room did not erupt, it tightened like a held breath that no one wanted to release, and Ethan Caldwell felt the shift before he saw it, because patterns did not break without consequence. The man at the back table finally moved. He did not rush, he did not react with frustration, he simply stood up, placing both hands lightly on the edge of the table as if concluding something internal. His drink remained untouched, a silent detail that spoke louder than action. He adjusted his jacket, slowly, his eyes scanning the room, once more, not searching for Maya this time, but measuring the space differently, as if recalculating the limits that had just been placed on him. Maya Johnson noticed immediately, even before he took his first step. Her body responded, not with fear this time, but with awareness. Her posture straightened just slightly, her movements becoming more deliberate. She was no longer avoiding, she was preparing. She moved toward the service station again, but her pace was controlled, not hurried, as if she refused to give the moment any more power than it already held. Ethan shifted his position again, not blocking, not confronting, but aligning himself with the path the man would have to take if he continued forward, because some decisions did not require words, they required presence. The man walked past 2 tables, then 3, his steps even, his expression unchanged, but his direction was clear. He was not leaving yet. Maya reached for a tray, her fingers steady now, but slower than before, as if she was aware that every movement was being seen, not just by him, but by someone else, someone who had already stepped into the pattern. Ethan watched the distance close between them again, but this time the air felt different, not tense, not fragile, something steadier, something grounded. Maya turned slightly her back, no longer fully exposed, her position angled just enough to keep both the man and Ethan within her awareness without directly facing either one. The man stopped a few feet away, not crossing into her space, not yet, his presence still, but deliberate, as if waiting for a response that did not come. Maya did not speak. She did not step back. She simply continued her task, placing a glass onto the tray, adjusting its position with quiet precision, the kind of normalcy that required effort in a moment like this. Ethan took one step forward, not enough to close the distance entirely, but enough to make the space between them no longer neutral. It was now occupied, defined, held. The man noticed his eyes shifting again, calculating the new dynamic, and for the first time since he had entered the room there was hesitation, not visible to most but clear to Ethan, because hesitation was a language he understood. The man exhaled slowly, then stepped back, not dramatically, not in defeat, just enough to break the line he had been holding. He turned slightly, his attention leaving Maya, not completely, but enough to signal that the moment had changed. Maya remained still for 1 second longer than necessary, then lifted the tray and moved forward, her steps steady, her breathing controlled, but her eyes no longer searching the room for escape. She was moving through it now with something different, something that had not been there before, and Ethan Caldwell did not follow her. He did not need to, because the shift had already happened. The pattern that once moved without resistance had met something it could not pass through, and for the first time that night, the man who had walked in with quiet certainty now moved with something else, something closer to caution, and the room, though still filled with light and conversation, carried a new truth, one that had not been spoken but could no longer be ignored. The distance that had once felt fragile now held steady, and Ethan Caldwell recognized the difference immediately, because control was not about forcing an outcome, it was about changing the conditions under which choices were made. The man had stepped back, but he had not left. He moved toward the exit slowly, his posture composed, his pace unhurried, as if nothing had shifted at all. But Ethan knew better, because a man who changed direction without reason was never unaffected. He paused near the front of the restaurant, his hand resting briefly on the back of a chair, his eyes scanning the room one last time, and when they passed over Maya Johnson, there was no longer certainty, there only calculation, the kind that comes when something expected does not unfold the way it always has. Maya continued her work, her movements now smoother, not because the tension was gone, but because she had adjusted to it. Her steps measured, her breathing. Even she approached a new table near the window, placing down glasses with quiet precision, her voice steady as she spoke, but beneath that calm there was something new, not fear, not avoidance, something closer to presence. She was no longer moving as someone trying to remain unseen, she was moving as someone aware that she had been seen, and that changed everything. Ethan remained near the center of the room, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable, but his awareness extended across every movement, every shift, every subtle change in rhythm. The manager glanced toward him once, then quickly away, uncertain of what had happened, but certain that something had. The staff continued their routines, the guests remained in their conversations, but the atmosphere carried a quiet undercurrent, like a note that had been struck and was still resonating just beneath the surface. The man at the entrance adjusted his jacket again, then pushed the door open, stepping out into the night. Without looking back, the soft chime of the door marked his exit, but the absence he left behind was not empty, it was defined. Maya felt it immediately, not in the room itself, but in the way her body no longer braced for his presence. Her shoulders lowered slightly, her breath deepened just enough to be noticeable only to her. She placed an order at the service station, her hands steady, her voice calm, and for the first time since the night began, she did not check the reflection behind her, she did not measure the space. She simply stood there for a moment, letting the stillness settle. Ethan watched her from a distance, not approaching, not interrupting, because this moment did not belong to him, it belonged to her. The shift, the realization, the quiet return of something that had been taken from her piece by piece. Without sound, Maya turned slightly, her eyes scanning the room, not in search of danger, but in recognition of it being gone. And when her gaze found Ethan again, it did not carry confusion this time, it carried understanding, not fully formed, not yet trust, but something close to it, something that acknowledged what had been done. Without needing words, Ethan gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, then looked away, returning his attention to the room, because presence did not demand acknowledgement, it simply existed, and in that moment the balance that had been fragile at the start of the night, had settled into something stronger, something quieter, something that could not be undone, and the restaurant continued as it always had, filled with light and sound and movement. But beneath it all there was a difference, one that could not be seen by most, but would be remembered by those who felt it, the moment when silence was broken not by noise, but by someone choosing to see and not look away. The night did not end when the door closed behind the man. It lingered in the space he left behind, and Ethan Caldwell understood that absence did not erase what had been set in motion. It only revealed what remained. Maya Johnson continued moving through the restaurant, but her rhythm had changed in a way that could not be undone. Her steps were no longer measured for avoidance, they were measured for purpose. She carried a tray across the floor, the glasses steady, the light catching their edges as she passed beneath the chandeliers, and for the first time that evening she did not adjust her sleeve when it slipped slightly. She simply continued moving as if the need to hide had loosened its grip just enough to let her breathe. The room responded in subtle ways. The manager spoke to her with less impatience. A coworker offered a brief nod of acknowledgement that had not been there before. Even the guests seemed to sense something without understanding it, their voices lowering slightly as she approached their tables, as if the air around her had shifted. Ethan remained where he was for a moment longer, watching, not out of suspicion now, but out of certainty, because what he had witnessed was not an isolated moment. It was a pattern interrupted, and patterns once broken rarely return to their original form. He turned, then walking toward a quieter section near the back, not to follow her, but to create distance, to allow the moment to settle without his presence shaping it further, because control was not about staying, it was about knowing when to step away. Maya placed down another set of dishes, her voice calm as she thanked the guests, her eyes lifting briefly, not searching now, but steady. And when she turned, she caught her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. She paused just for a second, looking at herself, not at the uniform, not at the role, but at the person beneath it, and something in her expression softened, not with relief, but with recognition, as if she had remembered something she had almost forgotten. Ethan reached the far end of the room, his reflection passing through the glass panels that separated the dining area from the city beyond, lights stretching into the distance, miles of movement and silence coexisting, just like the moment that had unfolded inside. He took out his phone, not hurried, not tense, and made a call, his voice low, his words few, enough details to ensure that what needed attention would receive it without delay, without spectacle, because some actions did not need to be seen to be effective. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his gaze returning once more to the room, not to Maya, not to the place where the man had stood, but to the space itself, because what mattered now was not what had happened, but what would no longer happen. Maya moved again, her posture lighter, not because the world had changed, but because something inside her had shifted just enough to alter how she moved through it. And as she passed by the center of the room once more, she did not look for him. She did not need to, because his presence had already done what it was meant to do. Ethan Caldwell turned toward the exit, his steps unhurried, blending into the quiet rhythm of the night as he walked away, without announcement, without acknowledgement, because what had taken place did not belong to him. It belonged to the moment when someone chose to see, and that was enough. And as the door closed behind him, the restaurant continued as it always had, filled with light and sound and motion, but beneath it there remained something different, something that would not be spoken, but would be remembered in the way Maya Johnson carried herself from that night forward, no longer invisible, no longer unseen, but quietly aware that the world had shifted, if only by a single decision made in silence. The night stretched beyond the restaurant walls and settled into the quiet hours where the city slowed, but never truly slept, and Maya Johnson felt it as she stepped out into the cool air, her shift finally over. Her hands free for the first time in hours, her shoulders no longer carrying trays or tension in the same way. The streetlights cast long reflections across the pavement, and for a moment she stood still, just breathing, not because she was tired, but because something inside her needed to understand what had changed. The door behind her closed softly, and the noise of the restaurant faded into the background, replaced by distant traffic and the steady hum of a city that moved on without noticing the small shifts that happened within it. Maya adjusted her jacket, her fingers brushing lightly against her wrist where the faint mark remained. She did not hide it this time. She simply acknowledged it, her gaze lifting toward the street ahead, not scanning, not searching, just present. And that alone felt unfamiliar. Across the street a car idled, its engine low, its windows dark, not out of place, not unusual, just another detail in a city full of them. But tonight details mattered more than they had before. Maya took a step forward, then another, her pace steady, her posture upright, not rushed, not hesitant, just moving as someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to conceal. At that moment, Ethan Caldwell sat in the back seat of the car, his silhouette barely visible behind the tinted glass, his eyes calm, his expression unreadable, as he watched the scene unfold, not with urgency, not with concern, but with quiet certainty, because he had not left things to chance. He never did. The call he had made earlier had not been about control, it had been about ensuring that the pattern he had interrupted would not simply return once his presence was gone. The driver remained silent, hands on the wheel, waiting for instruction. That did not come because Ethan did not need to give one. The situation was already moving in the direction he intended. Maya reached the corner of the block, pausing briefly as the signal changed, her reflection caught in the dark window of a closed storefront. She looked at herself again, not as a server, not as someone trying to remain unseen, but as someone who had made it through something without fully understanding how, and for the first time in a long time, she did not feel like she was walking alone, not because someone was beside her, but because something had shifted in the way the world responded to her. She crossed the street, her steps steady, her breathing even, and behind her the car remained where it was for a moment longer before slowly pulling away, blending back into the quiet rhythm of the night. Ethan leaned back slightly, his gaze no longer fixed on her, but on the city ahead, because what mattered now was not the moment itself, but what it had set into motion, the kind of change that did not announce itself, the kind that revealed itself over time in choices and movement, in the absence of fear where it once lived. And as the car disappeared into the distance, Maya continued forward, her path no longer defined by what she had been avoiding, but by what she had begun to reclaim. And somewhere within that quiet shift, something lasting took hold, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable, the kind of change that did not ask permission and did not fade with the night. Morning did not arrive with answers, it arrived with light, and Maya Johnson noticed the difference the moment it touched her window, not because the world had changed, but because she stood in the small space of her apartment, the quiet surrounding her in a way that felt unfamiliar, not empty, not heavy, just still. Her jacket rested over the back of a chair, her shoes placed neatly by the door, everything exactly where it had been the night before, and yet nothing felt the same. She moved toward the mirror, her reflection steady, her posture upright, her eyes clearer than they had been in a long time. She raised her hand slowly, her fingers brushing against her wrist, where the faint mark remained softer now but still present, a reminder not of what had happened, but of what had been carried for far too long. She did not pull her sleeve down, she did not turn away, she simply looked at it, and then at herself. And in that moment there was no need to hide anything, not from the world, not from her own reflection. Across the city, Ethan Caldwell stood by the floor to ceiling windows of his office, the skyline stretching out before him, the early light casting long shadows across polished surfaces. His phone rested on the desk behind him, silent now, because the work had already been set in motion. The call from the night before had not been about force, it had been about structure, about ensuring that what had once followed Maya would not find its way back into her life unnoticed again. His gaze remained steady, not on any one building, not on any one street, but on the city as a whole, because he understood that change did not come from moments, it came from what followed them, from the quiet decisions that shaped what happened next. Maya stepped outside later that morning, her steps steady, her pace unhurried, the air cool against her skin. She passed people on the sidewalk, each one moving through their own lives, their own routines, unaware of the shift that had taken place within her, but that did not matter. Awareness from others was never the point. She reached the bus stop, standing among strangers, her posture calm, her eyes forward, and for the first time in a long time, she did not position herself at the edge. She did not measure distance, she simply stood where she was. The city moved around her, cars passing, voices blending into the rhythm of the day, and she remained part of it, not hidden, not withdrawn, just present. The bus arrived, and she stepped on, taking a seat by the window, her reflection faint against the glass layered over the movement outside, and she watched it not with doubt, not with hesitation, but with a quiet understanding that something had shifted in a way that could not be undone. Back in his office, Ethan turned away from the window finally, his expression unchanged, but his decision already made, the kind that did not require repetition, because once it was set in motion it carried itself forward. He reached for a file on his desk, not looking at the name, not needing to, because what mattered was not who had been involved, it was what would no longer be allowed to continue. And as the city continued its rhythm, unaware of the quiet alignment that had taken place, two lives moved forward, not connected by words, not defined by acknowledgement, but shaped by a moment where silence had been interrupted and something steadier had taken its place, something that would not fade with time but would remain in the choices that followed and in the quiet certainty that once seen dignity could not be unseen. Days passed without announcement, without headlines, without anything that would mark what had changed to anyone except those who felt it, and Maya Johnson felt it in the quiet details that once shaped her every movement. She walked into the restaurant again, under the same warm lights, the same polished surfaces, the same rhythm of voices and glass, but this time she did not pause at the entrance. She did not measure the room before stepping in. She simply walked forward, her posture steady, her breath. Even the manager greeted her with a brief nod, not rushed, not dismissive, just different, as if something about her presence had shifted in a way that others could not name, but could not ignore either. She moved through her routine, preparing tables, adjusting settings, greeting guests, but her hands no longer carried that hidden tension. Her voice no longer pressed itself into silence. She was still calm, still composed, but no longer diminished by the space around her. Across the room, a new group of guests settled into a table, their laughter light, their presence ordinary. And for the first time, that place felt exactly that, ordinary, not a space she had to survive, but one she could simply exist within. And that difference, though subtle, was everything. Ethan Caldwell did not return to the restaurant. He did not need to. His absence was part of the balance he had set in motion. Because what he had done was never about being seen, it was about ensuring that what had once followed Maya would no longer move without consequence. In his office, the city stretched out as it always had, but his attention had already moved on, not because the moment had no meaning, but because it had reached its purpose. The file he had set aside remained closed, the decision complete, without repetition, without display, because some actions once taken did not need to be revisited. They simply reshaped the path ahead. Maya passed by the center of the room, carrying a tray, her reflection catching briefly in the mirror behind the bar. She glanced at it, not to check, not to correct, just to see, and in that reflection there was no hesitation, no quiet attempt to disappear. There was only presence, steady, grounded, and real. She adjusted a glass on the tray, then continued forward, her steps aligned with the rhythm of the room, not against it, not around it, but within it. And as the evening unfolded, nothing extraordinary happened. No